to some dare call it conspiracy, The Downfall of Richard D. Hall, Part 2, with Brent Lee, Neil Sanders, and Joe Hill.
So, we're now to the 22nd of March 2017, and the Westminster Bridge attack happens. Khalid Massoud drives his van at pedestrians on Westminster Bridge before crashing into the perimeter fence of the Palace of Westminster, and he is shot dead by police as he runs towards Parliament. He killed 5 and he injured over 50 people. Now, later that same year, on the 3rd of June, the London Bridge attack happens. And 3 terrorists drive a van at pedestrians before exiting and attacking people with knives. 8 people were killed and over 40 people were injured. But thankfully, Nick Kollerstrom's got some thoughts on this. And he appears again on Rich Planet on the 12th of August 2017 with a show titled Recent Terror Attacks, How Fake Are They? And again, interesting quotes. Richard says,
at this point in time, I have no opinion on Westminster or Manchester other than I don't trust the mainstream media and I wouldn't trust an inquest. That's my only opinion at this point in time.
So that's Richard saying he has no opinion on whether Manchester is fake or not. But Nick makes a big deal about the number 22. He says that at Manchester, there were 22 killed by the 22-year-old on the 22nd, and this is definitely significant. They don't know why it's significant. They don't offer any explanation as to why it's significant, but it's significant because, you know, all those 22s, the ducks of hell. That's what it is. Anyway, Nick then says that the Westminster Bridge attack on the 27th of March was fake, and the evidence is the lack of blood seen in media reports. So Nick thinks that the alleged killing of a policeman that supposedly took place on that day didn't happen. Now, what's interesting is that Richard pushes back, and he says a viewer has emailed him to say he knows about Nick's theory, and he also knows the paramedics that treated the dying policeman. And Nick says that it was clear that some of the dead in pictures were dummies, and therefore crisis actors must have been used. And Richard says,
I wouldn't state that you're wrong, Nick. I would state that it's, unless you can go and touch that dummy or person, you don't really know until you've examined it. So because other people let me put it this way: other people who've looked at the images say they're not dummies, they're bodies. Yeah. So it's a matter of opinion rather than.
It is indeed. Yeah.
He doesn't say fact; he gets cut off, but that's what he's saying. But what's interesting is that Richard's saying, looking at a picture does not tell you whether a person is dead or whether that or anything is real or what, which again is interesting because that would become the mainstay of Richard's theory on Manchester, that he's looked at some of these pictures of dead bodies and doesn't think that they're dead bodies. They could just be people lying down. Exactly. At the start of part 2, there's something that comes on that might give Richard a bit of an idea.
This same viewer states, this Westminster attack has been filmed on different days. If you look at this video with the road being wet in one and dry in the other, and different types of buses and number of buses on the bridge.
What Richard thinks is that potentially the Westminster attack was filmed over 2 separate days. Why they would do that, I've got no idea. But Nick agrees with him, and he says that that is exactly what they did at Manchester. So it is Nick that put the idea of the 22 at Manchester being fake and that idea of it being filmed on different days, which was due to a misunderstanding of what he thought was EXIF data on the photographs. So that's Nick's idea. Nick also mentions the lady Jenny Brewster, who was told to not go towards the foyer if she wanted to get to the car park, and says that this is indication that the people at the event were in on the elaborate theatre, trying to get people away from where the fake bomb went off. And that is something that Richard uses prominently in his explanation of his theory later on. Richard says,
so this is the contention that you make in the book, that round about 2012, the attacks before that date are on the whole real deaths and all, it's just the perpetrator that's incorrectly interpreted in the mainstream media. But after round about 2012, you're saying that there's a lot more fabrication and pretend deaths.
Apparently dummies and crisis actors can do it. It starts with the Boston bombing in America. You see a whole lot of crisis actors, it's perfectly obvious. You can see them wandering around, and fake blood. And then we get the next year, Drummer-Lee Rigby in England. You get some sort of dummy put in the middle of the street without any blood.
It causes a huge amount of controversy, the Woolwich-Lee Rigby thing.
Later in the show, he says,
if viewers want to provide any evidence of what they believe happened, then fine, send us evidence. But if there's going to be any testimony evidence, it's got to be first-hand witnesses. If you know a first-hand witness who saw something, you've got to get them to agree to an interview, send them my way, send them contact details, and I'll interview them, right? Saying someone told you something is not good enough, right? It's not good enough.
Yeah.
Saying someone told you something is not good enough. That's Richard when he's talking about deciding whether things are fake or not. And he's talking about Lee Rigby because at the time he can understand that people are a bit upset about saying that this person that was murdered wasn't murdered, I don't know if I should touch that. And then says that basically, look, you need to actually get solid evidence. Looking at something, saying this is my opinion, getting second-hand knowledge, nitpicking at statements and seeing if they match up, that is not evidence. Not my words, the words of Richard D. Hall. So, But anyway, 5 minutes later, Richard says,
I'm hypothesizing here, folks. I'm not saying that they do this, but perhaps they do this, right? Yeah. So they're going to run a training exercise. So all the operatives involved in the training exercise are told, look, you must go along and as if this was real, because we want the public to react as though it were real so that we can test our responses. In other words, we're doing a far more realistic training exercise where we're making the public think it's real and the media so that we can monitor public responses and all the rest of it, right?
Two things. One, he said that you really shouldn't just speculate. And then 5 minutes later, he wildly speculates. But he's still not fully on board with the crisis actor theory, even for Manchester. And he's still putting forward explanations for why Nick might be both simultaneously right and wrong at the same time. And Nick says that anybody involved in such an event must have signed a non-disclosure act, so they can't talk about it. And Richard invites anybody who took part in any terror exercises to contact him for an interview. So, but he didn't get any response, sadly. On the 20th of May 2018, Richard releases a section of his live show talking about Joe Cox called The Assassination of Joe Cox. And in it, Richard weighs up whether or not Joe Cox is actually dead. He says that the lack of blood and no pictures of the body could indicate that, and that the fact that her family showed little grief might be explained by her not actually being that close to them, which is a despicable thing to say. But he warns that the idea that she might not be dead, i.e. hoax theory, might be a false narrative, a red herring to lead researchers astray. He says that Nick Colostrom thinks that Joe Cox didn't actually die, but Richard says that he thinks that she was murdered, but he understands why Nick thinks that she wasn't. But he doesn't think that Thomas Mayer was the killer. He thinks that he was set up and a military hitman killed Cox, whilst Mayer was sent on a fake gardening job by the police to an empty house with an overgrown garden, which apparently is where he was discovered hiding. So what happened was Thomas Mayer killed this woman and then ran off and hid in the garden of a house that he knew to be abandoned. And then when he was sort of seen, he then ran off and was caught elsewhere. Richard hypothesizes that basically he was sent on a job to this abandoned house to garden. That was where the police were supposed to have killed him, but he then escaped, and so they had to publicly catch him down the road, essentially. So that was the thing. On the 1st of March 2019, he releases Exit from Brexit, the Joe Cox Departure, his film on the murder of Joe Cox. And in it, he expands on this theory. He says that Tommy Mayer was not the killer. He was supposed to be killed so that there was no trial. Now, in the film, Richard goes on a road trip in his van to look at the crime scene and to doorstep witnesses and friends of Mayer. So, yeah, not the best idea. And he says,
there are some who suspect Joe Cox was not killed and the murder was hoaxed. Anyone who thinks deaths can't be hoaxed please watch this compelling film about the 2013 Boston bombing. I am open-minded on this. It is possible, if the victim and one or two of the witnesses participated in a hoax, that all the other genuine witnesses were fooled. If you don't think this is possible, you must watch the Boston unbombing video. I can assure you it will change your mind. After you've watched it, you will realize just how realistic hoaxes can be made to look using moulage, blood pumps and other techniques.
And the Boston bombing, what happened was there was 3 people that were taking photographs of the events as they unfolded, and they were released onto the internet. And people looking at these still photographs went, hang on, this looks like people doing an elaborate street theatre, which was basically based on the fact that this one guy had his legs blown off, and they didn't think that it was possible for somebody to sit there with his legs blown off. And that was literally it, to be quite honest. There was a few other bits and bobs, but they're all equally silly. But Richard is apparently quite taken by this. Now, Richard says that Bernard Kenny, who was who received a punctured liver at the scene of Joe Cox's attack because he was trying to stop this man stabbing and shooting this poor woman to death, he only spent a short time in hospital and hasn't been heard of since. And Richard finds that really suspicious. Now, if it had just done a fucking Google search, you would find that that's not true at all. There's simply dozens of articles about this bloke, about him being stabbed, about him recovering from being stabbed, about his thoughts on why Joe Cox was killed, and also when he received the George Medal for Bravery. But other than that, this man's completely disappeared. Anyway, he spoke to another unnamed witness who said that the police were moving people away, but there was this one lady here called Fazila Aswat, who she wasn't pushed aside by the police. Also, this woman wanted to get Joe Cox to her constituency meeting on time, and she didn't call 999. She called a special hotline that went straight through to a police chief inspector. And this is all really suspicious. And Richard speculates that this is solid evidence that this Fazila Aswat was setting up Joe to be murdered at this spot. Now, Fazila Aswat was Joe Cox's aide, like her assistant, and her job was to get her to places on time. And of course she had a special hotline to the police, because it was known at the time that right-wing idiots were threatening certain MPs and stuff like that. None of this is suspicious. This is all the actions of somebody doing their job as an assistant to an MP. But Richard says that when Joe Cox's body was kept at the scene in an ambulance for over 50 minutes, which is very suspicious, but it's not, is it? Because you know what they have in the back of ambulances? Life-saving machinery and devices. They were trying to save her life, probably realizing that she was in too fragile a state to race through the city in the back of an ambulance. And apparently, her body was taken to London rather than Leeds, which was closer. And this is all completely suspicious. He's not bothered to look into if there was any reason for this at all, but he is very, very suspicious of it. And also, the pathologist who dealt with Joe Cox had also dealt with the death of Dr. David Kelly, the man who told people about Tony Blair's dodgy dossier and lying about the ability of Iraq to attack the UK, which was a precursor to invading Iraq. That's very suspicious, obviously, because a person in London was the same pathologist on 2 bodies in London. It's unprecedented, isn't it? He then gets really, really shitty and starts basically saying that, well, actually, if you look at their family, the family don't really seem that sad that their sister's dead. And at one point, one of them flashes an OK symbol, which at the time wasn't a white supremacist symbol, it was 666. And Richard makes a big point about how this is probably some parts of some satanic ritual. Now, interestingly, in this film, Richard gets cautioned by the police for harassing a witness. Someone doesn't want to speak to him. There's a man called Darren Playford who witnessed Tommy Mayer, and he actually made a 999 call and stayed on the call for about 10-15 minutes or something like that, trying to direct the police to this man who was running away. Now, Richard goes to this guy's house and knocks on his door, and he's told to go away. He then phones him and asks if he could interview him, and he politely refuses. And then for some reason, Richard decides that he wants to contact statement analyst Peter Hyatt, who tells him, no, keep pushing, go for an interview again. So statement analyst Peter Hyatt, who's the person that would put him onto Genevieve Lewis, is the person that encourages him to keep harassing this bloke. So he sends him a letter with a load of sort of questions and empty boxes for him to fill in the answers. And he even offers him some money to appear on his show because he wants to talk to him. And the following day, Richard is visited by South West Wales Police as a complaint was made, and he's told never to contact this man again. And Richard obviously thinks that this is proof of a government plot. Now, ironically, the next day, Richard decides to just go back to the murder scene one last time and film around, see if he can get sort of establishing shots, anything that could be useful in his upcoming film. And who pulls up next to him in his Range Rover but Darren Playford? So Richard has to very, very quickly jump in his car and escape, lest he thinks that he's continuing to harass him. But yeah, he doesn't sort of take any lessons from this. As we know later, Richard will be accused of all sorts of harassment. But yeah, just very interesting to see that he's essentially doing the same thing. So on the 18th of May 2019, Richard releases a live show where he says that fake terror is now part of the apparatus of the state. And at this point, he's completely convinced that Jo Cox, who was murdered by Thomas Mayer, was not actually killed. She's off living in South America somewhere. Nick Colostrom has convinced him of this. But also, what's happened in the interim is he's watched that Boston unbombing film. Now, the person that gave him the Boston unbombing film was his other good friend and long-time participant on Rich Planet, Andrew Johnson. So Andrew Johnson, who also in the past thought that hoaxes were silly, he is the person that groomed Richard essentially by getting him to watch the Boston unbombing, and now he thinks that everything's fake. Now, he thinks that basically Jo Cox was an agent of George Soros. There's no evidence to support this, but she basically was quite keen on remaining in the EU. And obviously, she was a fan of the White Helmets. So what Richard's theory is that basically her death was faked in order to make people more sympathetic to the Remain vote. That's what he thinks. He also thinks for some reason that she was involved in the release of the Panama Papers, which I don't think she was. The Panama Papers were documents that indicated rich corporations and people within the UK were holding offshore bank accounts, essentially not paying tax. And there was some talk that if we remained in the EU, that you wouldn't be allowed to have offshore bank accounts, which turned out to be not true. Anyway, Richard thinks that basically this is why her death was faked, in order to garner sympathy for the Remain vote. He also, for no reason at all, thinks that basically her marriage was a sham, and that she really wasn't sort of in a very strong relationship with either her family or her husband. He gives no reason for this other than smiling in the press, basically, which, yeah, totally just appalling. Now, he also, this is the first time that he shows the EXIF data. Now, the EXIF data is basically the metadata that is on the photos of the Manchester bombing. And in the metadata, it says 0711, which Richard takes to mean that the photo was taken at 7 a.m. in the morning. Now, we discussed this. This is his main piece of evidence that shows that Manchester was fabricated. He also introduces a bit of statement analysis and mocks Nick Bickerstaff. And basically, he'd first become enamored with statement analysis in 2016 as part of his Madeleine McCann investigation, but then he uses it for like literally everything. Now, the EXIF data is the metadata. We go over this in far greater detail in our breakdown. The long and short of it is that the 7-11 is not referring to 7-11 in the morning. It's 7-11 in the evening in the New York offices of Associated Press, because it's not EXIF data, it's press transfer data, and press transfer data uses a 12-hour clock rather than a 24-hour clock. So it's actually just past 11 in the UK. So it was taken at the time of the bombing. So that's complete just nonsense. And if we found that out, Richard could have found that out, but he didn't. Now, in the talk, he says, now then, I listed these terror attacks earlier, and I just want to point a few things out. If we go back in time to 9/11 and work our way forward, at that time, clearly people died in 9/11. And then we go back to 2005, the London bombings, people died in those London two bombings, no doubt. 56 people died. I consider the Cumbria shootings as a terrorist incident or a fabricated terrorist incident. Yes, people definitely died there. Now, as we approach 2012, 2013, it all gets a bit different, right? This is when I believe the hoaxing started. So we had Sandy Hook, well, that was at the end of 2012. And as I showed you earlier, the Boston bombing was in 2013. So there are cases where it looks like deaths were being fabricated. So I think there was a change of modus operandi around that time from real deaths to fabricated deaths. But I think they've changed their modus operandi again, and I'm just going to point it out. So if you take that time, 2016, and look at the UK terror attacks from that point, okay, we've got the Joe Cox attack in 2016, the Westminster attack in 2017, that took place on a bridge. And then look at the next UK attack, the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But that was done indoors. Not only that, it was done in an area which was being controlled before the quote-unquote bomb went off. So again, very little public visibility. So I think from 2016 onwards, they've taken care to make sure that there is no witnesses, because everyone has a mobile phone in their pocket these days, right? So I think around the 2012, we're seeing more fabricated deaths, and I think that we're having that now. But they're being very careful not to allow people to gather their own evidence from these fabricated terrorist incidents. And on the 1st of August 2019, Richard starts to release UK critical thinkers videos on the Manchester bombing and how it was all faked. And on the 27th of March 2020, Richard releases his book, Manchester, Night of the Bang.
I don't know if you want to add this in right now, but in the timeline here, October 2019, Jim Fetzer's in court, and he is told that he has to pay $400,000 for Sandy Hook.
Yes. Okay. So that's a very good point, actually, because that is, again, something that should have been on people's radar. And I certainly knew about it when it happened. I seem to remember at the time thinking, yep, good. But that's a really interesting point, because October, when Fetzer's being sued, that's where Richard's book would have been in the sort of final throes of being completed. So he has a choice at that point, doesn't he? Does he take that as, oh, that potentially we're wrong? Or does he, and I think we know the answer, he takes that as, wow, that means that this is correct. That's the only reason that he can fathom that someone would take somebody to court over that, is because basically they want to shut down this investigation. So in a weird way, Jim Fetzer being sued could have actually been a bit of a spark to him, a sort of, well, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to stand up for what's right. It's also entirely possible that he didn't find out about that until later, but I would be astonished because, you'd have thought at least Nick would have said something about it.
Yeah, exactly. They both knew who this guy was.
Yeah.
Because they've built all their theories of the hoaxes on this guy's work.
What's interesting as well is if you look at the thing as well, like nearly nothing of it is Richard's theory. It's all Nick's theory and UK critical thinkers theory. And then he's relied very heavily on Genevieve Lewis, and from that, they've got the more horrible stuff about Safi Roussos and about Martin and about Eve and other people and his interpretation that, it's very clear that the daughter and mother never really got on and stuff like that. It's like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, absolutely.
And yet in that, like, he's the one who's put his name to it, and he's the one who's eating the most shit.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've heard of those guys, and I'm like, fascinated. It seems like a real origin story. It's like when they do like a sort of Pulp Fiction sort of timeline where you like see the end of the movie at the start. You're like, oh, fucking hell, this all makes so much sense now. But like, it really is quite wild for someone to be so pilled and so dedicated to something, so brainwashed, for lack of a better term, to basically take the, for lack of a better term, shrapnel on something that is someone else's thing. Like, you know, this is like, all I've heard of is him being this obnoxious creature, hanging out in vans, waiting out to see people, blah, blah, blah. But holy shit, there's other people here who have just sort of like spawned this entire thing, and they're not in court.
No, but this is the thing. Richard made it his thing. I even remember, I think we said this in the extended thing. When it first came out, I sat and watched it with Chris, and we just went, bloody hell, Richard's trying to get himself a reputation off the back of this. Like, that's what he's trying to do. Because I'm sure at the time other people had been in the papers and stuff, and there's still, well, actually, you know, I'm saying this, right? Okay. Because at the time, Alex Jones had not had the consequences, but we can go and look at our own investigations. That Jim Fetzer had the consequences. That other guy had the consequences. Probably at that point, although he was possibly not aware of it. But yeah, so on the 27th of March, he releases his book, The Manchester Night of the Bang, and the film as it was the prior week. And he also that week releases an extended cut of the statement analysis by Genevieve Lewis. So all the stuff that wasn't that was in the book but wasn't in his film because it was just hellishly dull. That's out there as well. But yeah, that's fascinating. That like he must have just doubled down. He must have gone, I'm willing to take the hit on this. And yeah, because I remember at the time as well, because these Madeline films had sort of made a bit of a fuss and then sort of petered off. And, you know, I think he wanted it to sort of turn him into, ironically, I think he wanted him to turn him into Alex Jones. And guess what it did? But just not in the way that he expected it. Wow. Yeah. Irony. Anyway. So in the 30th of June, 2020, he releases a film of his recent live tour where he explained to audiences his theory regarding the Manchester bombing, and it's called Tommy Mayer, Joe Cox, Manchester bombing, Rendlesham UFO. And in this live talk, he explains that Joe Cox didn't die, Tommy Mayer was framed, the Manchester Arena bomb was an elaborate hoax, but the Rendlesham Forest UFO was definitely real. So at least he's not completely ungrounded. Oh dear. On the 10th of August 2022, Mariana Spring emails Richard and says that she's doing a podcast and a documentary saying, I want to interview you to find out more about you, your career and your online profile. I'll be very keen to discuss more about this as soon as possible. Would you be available for a call at some point over the next week? I'm also very happy to come and meet you to discuss this further, but she does not mention Manchester. On the 19th of August, she sends the same email again, but she also includes Mariana's phone number. On the 20th of August, 2022, Richard responds and says, thanks for contacting me. Can you please send me all of the detailed program proposals / treatments for the show / shows you intend to produce, along with the details of who has written them and which people are devising / producing the material, which is obviously a completely unreasonable request. But, you know, Richard's suspicious of the BBC. It's not unusual that he responds like that, if I'm brutally honest. So on the 8th of September, Mariana Spring responds and says, it's for Panorama. This interview request is for a podcast series for Radio 4 and a documentary for BBC Panorama. We want to understand more about your videos and work, asking questions about what you do and why. At that point, if I was Richard, I would be absolutely shitting myself. Because at this point, he's aware that at some point, they're going to do a Panorama show about him. And it's not going to be a good one, is it? Like, let's be honest, right? They're not going to do a Panorama show to say, everyone should probably go and look at this guy's stuff. It's really good. So, you can to a degree sympathize with what Richard must have been thinking at that point. So, on the 30th of September, she sends the same email. And on the 14th, 16th, and 19th of September, she sends a further email requesting a chat on the phone. On the 23rd of September, she emails, "Our main interest is in the theories that you've promoted around the UK terror attacks, like the Manchester Arena bombing." And on the very same day, Richard responds, because at this point he's twigged. "Hello. Sorry, I can't entertain your offer. I'm fully aware of what your programme intention is due to the past experience of people like Dr. Nick Colstrom, who the BBC tricked into thinking they would air his interviews about the 7/7 London bombings. The programme makers left out all of his dialogue and only showed footage that they secretly recorded of him without his knowledge. I have the correspondence with the BBC and Andrew Johnson and Dr. Judy Wood. This correspondence shows that the BBC did not have any intention of representing their work correctly about 9/11. The BBC has shown itself over many years to be duplicitous, and its raison d'etre is not about reporting the truth. If you mention me or my work, I insist that each time I or my work is referred to, that you mention and display a prominent link to the following website URL, richplanet.net Manchester, so that people can find the whole work and judge it for themselves. I do not give permission to show or broadcast any of my videos. If you show or transmit any of my work or videos, I will take legal advice." And on the same day, he also emails, "If you state in your program that I refuse to take part, I insist that you include my reason why I refuse to take part. I refuse to take part because I'm fully aware that your program intention is due to the past experience of people like Dr. Nick Colstrom." Blah, blah, blah. On the 26th of September, Mariana responds by saying, "Why don't we just have a chat on the phone about this? You know, that seems simple." And on the same day, he responds and says, "Hello. You mentioned my theories and views. Neither of these are important in an investigation. What is important is evidence, and the fact that you fail to mention evidence and merely want theories and views shows a poor journalistic intention. I'm not interested in taking part in a film about me, my views or theories. The only thing that matters is evidence. Why aren't you interested in evidence?" And that is something that we will come on to later, but basically, like, what Richard actually thinks constitutes evidence is not evidence. It's his opinions, theories, and views. We will come on to that in a bit. He also, on the same day, so he's panicking now because there's a few times where he's sending like multiple emails on the same day. "In my Manchester film, I produce evidence, exclusive police radio communications, that proves that the alleged Manchester bomber left the arena after the bang and was pursued by armed response vehicles and then arrested at gunpoint. Therefore, there was no suicide. A real journalist would not be interested in me or my views. They would be interested in the evidence which proves that there was no suicide. Please don't contact me again." Suffice to say that doesn't prove that there was no suicide. For further details, listen to our podcast. On the 27th and the 28th, Mariana emails and says it's the evidence that they want to discuss. And the BBC send a letter to Richard saying, "Dear Mr. Hall, BBC Panorama and BBC Podcasts are investigating the impact of conspiracy theories around UK terror attacks as part of my documentary and podcasts. We plan to look at your films that you've promoted on your website and your book, Manchester, The Night of the Bang. I'm therefore writing to invite you to respond/comment on a number of points and issues which, as a result of our investigation and research, we're considering including in our output. As our programme nears its broadcast date, there may be other matters which will also invite your responses. 1. You have promoted theories that the Manchester Arena terror attack in 2017 was staged, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. 2. You have promoted these theories online, as well as in a book and a DVD. 3. You have approached the homes and workplaces of some of the affected families and survivors of the Manchester Arena attack, claiming to seek evidence that they have not been injured. This includes hiding cameras outside somebody's home. 4. You've accused some of the affected families and survivors of the Manchester attack of lying, described them as crisis actors, and claimed that people did not die and were not injured in the attack. 5. These actions have caused substantial harm and distress to bereaved families and the survivors. 6. You have encouraged other people to follow your opinions of these events and conduct similar investigations, which has also directly resulted in followers sending hateful comments and abuse to victims of the Manchester terror attack. 7. Your output has contributed to a culture that encourages hateful comments and abuse to be sent to the victims of the UK terror attacks whenever such an attack occurs, often in the immediate aftermath. 8. Your videos repeatedly reference Nick Colstrom to support your theories that terrorist attacks were fake. Mr. Colstrom is a Holocaust denier and the author of a book, Breaking the Spell, The Holocaust Myth and Reality. The book claims that nobody was murdered in gas chambers and that any deaths at the camp were due to an outbreak of disease. 9, you have profited from your theories by selling books and DVDs, including those alleging the Manchester Arena attack was staged, as well as selling merchandise, tickets to tours, and inviting donations on your website. 10. Our research suggests that you have previously dismissed the idea that terror attacks are hoaxes and have changed your views over recent years. 11. The survivors of the terrorist attacks mentioned above say that you have added to their trauma. What is your response? They basically say that he's, please contact us. And he hasn't. So he responds on the 30th of September, basically just says, this letter contains at least 7 false accusations. If you broadcast any of these accusations, I will seek legal advice. On the 7th of October 2022, Mariana Spring visits Richard at his stall in Merthyr Tydfil. Now, he lives in Merthyr Tydfil and he has a stall there, or had a stall, where he was selling merchandise from his show. It was only open for a very, very short amount of time before the BBC basically explained what the upcoming programme was, and his stall was shut down. On the 28th of October, Richard releases a 26-minute film talking about Mariana Spring, filming him at his stall and saying that there's going to be a hit piece about it. And he goes through the letter that Mariana sent him with the 11 statements on it. And he also discusses his email exchange with Mariana Spring. He repeats attacks on Nick Bickerstaff, and he says that he doesn't trust the BBC, basically. He's also basically annoyed because his YouTube channel has been shut down at this point, and he claims that the BBC were behind this, which is not entirely true. The BBC contacted YouTube because they were going to use footage taken from YouTube, and so they explained what was actually on the channel, and YouTube went, "Oh, that completely violates our terms of services," and YouTube shut his channel down. He wasn't pursued by the BBC. In fact, when we spoke to Mariana, she was like, I was almost a bit embarrassed by that. It was an accident. That wasn't what they were trying to do.
Interestingly, I was just looking at the timeline again, and that is 7 days after we were in Manchester at the Panorama filming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason that she's got the idea that in the past you
that's what made me go look for it.
Yeah. That was when she took me to a pub in Nottingham and gave me a pint of Carling for some reason, and some chips that I didn't eat. That's when I.
And you're still friends. That's important. That's nice. Carling really is not. It's not a French beer.
Piss. I know.
You don't buy your friend Carling.
No, I was very disappointed. It's like, fuck out. We sold ourselves to George Soros for a pint of Carling. Not even Foster's. Yeah.
Look, I'll take a Fozzie. The first time I actually had a can of Forest Gold was from a offie in the UK, and it wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
but
certainly better than Carling. So,
but I must say, it was a very strange experience being like, interesting to try Australian beer here in the UK.
So, to show how tight this timeline is as well, on the 30th of October, that's when Disaster Trolls is released on BBC Sounds. And at that point, I was in contact with Richard and we were texting back and forth, talking about what was going off. And he made it very clear that he wasn't cross with me for going on Panorama or for the podcast, but he was really cross with me because I didn't agree with his theory. And we had a bit of back and forth, and I very lightly countered one of his mainstays, and he got very, very cross. Anyway. On the following day, the 31st of October, Halloween 2022, Panorama is shown on the BBC. What was it called? What was the Panorama show called? Was it Disaster Trolls, or was it? I can't remember. But it was the hit piece on.
Was it Disaster Deniers?
That was it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what the Panorama was called, but the show was called.
It was called Disaster Trolls. Yeah. And to be fair, if we're being 100% fair, the podcast was better, but it's 30 minutes and nothing in it was not true. So it is what it is.
It's a pain in the ass too, because as an Australian, I've just double checked it because I haven't seen the Disaster Denier things, and it is geo-blocked. So I guess you've got to get a VPN or something to,
It opens with a shot of me. And then I think, I'm going to be in this quite a lot. And then I'm in it for all of about 10 seconds and then I never appear again. But yeah, that came out on Halloween Panorama, and I thought that they were going to make a big deal about that, the conspiracy world, but they missed that. Also, I purposely wore a T-shirt that had the Mona Lisa with one eye obscured just to wind up the conspiracy crowd. And I think one person spotted it. One person. So, never mind. Also, I got recognised off the back of it, but it was by someone I've never met in my entire life. I was walking into a supermarket in the village where I live, and some bloke ran up to me and went, "Brilliant job on the telly the other day. Keep it up, mate." And I was like, "I don't know who you are, but thank you." And that was it.
It's almost slightly terrifying, to be fair. Slightly terrifying.
Oh, dear. But so the panorama comes out, and then on the same day as the panorama, Richard releases his response to the 11 allegations. And he says, in response to question 1, to my opinion, is that, to my knowledge, there has been no satisfactory evidence presented to the public which proves that the Manchester incident was not staged. For example, the public inquiry produced 4,100 PDF documents, some of which contained photographs and CCTV still images. To my knowledge, none of these photographs or still images show any recognisable deceased or seriously injured victim inside the arena foyer. That is simply not true. Martin Kliss is very, very prominent in that picture. He's recognised by his bald head and red T-shirt. What Richard is saying is that he refuses to believe that what he's seeing is real. His statement there is completely inaccurate. 2, I have followed evidence, then published details of my research and findings. 3, I've made some polite door-to-door inquiries in order to gather evidence, which is perfectly legitimate activity when doing research. I did not hide cameras outside somebody's home. You did hide a camera. You just decided not to put it in their garden. You put it in your van, which was aimed at their house. It wasn't on show, hence it was a hidden camera. Come on, that's just ridiculous. I have not accused anyone of lying. It is my opinion that some people involved have made false statements in their media interviews. Well, the false statement's a lie. So you literally accuse people of lying there. In fact, the entire basis of your theory is that the entire thing was a lie, and that every single person has lied every time they've said anything about the incident, going so far as to lying about whether their children are dead or not. So to suggest that you've not accused people of lying is just appalling. This is an opinion, not an accusation. With regards to the term crisis actors, I believe the evidence in the Nick Bickerstaff video proves he filmed his footage before the time of the explosion. Therefore, I believe he was acting. I believe that describing him as a crisis actor is accurate. Okay, so you've just accused him of lying again. Furthermore, the Nick Bickerstaff evidence doesn't actually prove anything of the sort. We discussed that at length in our podcast. I am easy to contact via my website, and to date, I have not received any direct contact by any Manchester victim to complain about my actions. I've carried out polite inquiries which have been within the law. Well, evidently not. That's bullshit. Why would anybody that was involved with Manchester, that is not the yardstick of whether you are being ethical or not. None of the people that I've been accusing of lying have got in contact with me and said, "Hey, let's just hash this out." That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. I appealed for information from the public, from witnesses who saw what happened, and from people who know people who saw what happened. This does not make me responsible for hateful messages sent by people I do not know to anyone who may have been involved. Which first thing is completely refusing to take responsibility for the actions that you've caused. You understand you have fans. You presented this as a reality for them. Of course, they're going to look into it. That's sort of the point of the conspiracy crowd, to do your own research. Also, if we go back to his previous quote about someone telling you something is not good enough, that's not evidence. He's literally said that that's all he has. That's literally all that he has. My output is concerned with seeking the truth about a variety of subjects and explaining what I discover. I have never encouraged anyone to send hateful comments or abuse. I'm not responsible for what other people choose to say or do. No, not entirely, but you must take a degree of responsibility because of your position within this field and your understanding that people do hang on your every word and they're fans of yours. You're uncovering a crime. In that regard, why would people not want to follow it up? It's like, I've got evidence that JFK was actually killed by Martians. Cool. Like, no, it invites another question. That's what you're doing. So that's just childish to have that lack of understanding. With regards to Dr. Nick Colostrom, my response would be to simply read his books on these subjects. They are very well researched and referenced. No, they aren't. They are shit. They are absolutely shit. Even in a particularly shit field, which is Holocaust denial, they're not very good. Like, I'm serious. Like, there are Holocaust denial things that they're erroneous and bad arguments that turn out not to be true, but they present them in such a way that is quite challenging at first. Nick's just not a great writer. Carrying out research and producing films about subjects people wish to know about is an occupation, just as it is for the BBC or other journalists. Would you expect anyone to work hundreds of hours for free? So that's him justifying getting paid. He changes his mind about that in the future. If new evidence comes to light on any subject, an opinion or conclusion could change. My opinion on fully hoax fabricated terror as opposed to fabricated terror with real deaths is that fully hoax fabricated terror has been used more frequently since around 2013. So that's in response to my question. And his final response is, I'm easy to contact and I've not been contacted by any person claiming to be a survivor of a terrorist attack to tell me that I've added to their trauma. Why would they, and what would you do if they did? Seriously, what would you do? In fact, you would incorporate that into your theory. Well, of course they contacted me and said my daughter's crying. That's to try and put me off the scent. Like, seriously, that's what he would say. Like, and so for him to say, well, no, so that's a moot point, completely pointless.
Now, the thing is, this was the 31st. This was the day that the panorama was supposed to go out.
Yep.
And at between 11:30 a.m. and 12 noon, I received a phone call from Mariana Spring saying, Richard has finally got back to me after all this time of trying to get him to speak, and now we have to cut you from the panorama because we have to address all the things that he's put forward. So this whole thing where they say, oh, this was a hit piece on Richard is sort of true, but of his own doing.
Yeah.
He sent this out, so they had to change everything last minute and show everything he said here and address everything he said here, all the evidence that they had for it. So that's why it became such a hit piece on what he was doing. It was his own fault for bringing all that up.
Yeah. It's strange how the world works, isn't it?
It's such a good insight into how journalism works, yeah.
So just to explain, basically...
That's the responsibility.
What was your bit going to be on the Panorama show that was going to be included in if Richard hadn't have responded?
Well, they were going to add the bit about me talking to the survivor of 7/7 and obviously my tinfoil confession story, basically, and how people can actually come out of the rabbit hole.
So it would have changed the entire conception and construction of the entire program.
Yeah. I think we had something like 9 minutes between the two of us. Like in the first cut, we were going to have 9 minutes of screen time to tell like our stories. And because Richard sent this email, that's why you only got like 15 seconds and I didn't get on there at all. They were going to incorporate, it was basically going to be a trailer for the podcast.
Right. Yeah.
For what they did, for their Disaster Trolls podcast. And it would have involved a lot of that stuff. So
this idea that the BBC were out to get Richard is just nonsense as well. If he'd have responded earlier than that, they could have also dealt with it. But because they've got such limited time, they've literally got that afternoon. They've got to recut it and they've got to give him right to reply, which also goes against this idea. Yeah, which also goes against the idea that basically he wasn't treated fairly. Yeah. Oh wow, that's incredible.
Isn't that wild though? It's just so wild how you can really just own gold. It's like the Streisand effect they talk about.
Oh,
you sue for defamation and then it just all blows up in your face.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah.
One of the things that is very, very strong through the conspiracy community is, or truther communities, whatever we call them, is that they don't understand journalism. to a fundamental strong point. And this is what happens when you don't understand something. You don't understand electoral politics. You don't understand local politics. You don't understand executive branch politics. And usually it's harmless because you're in an echo chamber and no one cares. But when you venture out of that and you walk into the real world, it has real world consequences. And of course, because of their perpetual victimhood, they just end up saying, oh, well, it's because we're being persecuted, we're being targeted, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. The reality is, from what I'm hearing, that's insane. It turns out that basically he kicked up a stink and it blew up in his face. Be careful what you wish for, man.
Well, I mean, it kind of gets worse than that because, we'll say, on the 1st of November, Merthyr Tydfil Council takes away his market stall. And I remember feeling really shitty about that because, like, Richard, like, for whatever reason, he was quite proud of that. And he was doing something. It was a bit of income and stuff like that. And I did feel a bit like, oh, the poor guy. But then his behaviour since then has made me less sympathetic towards him. On the 4th of November 2022, in the Daily Mail, on the front page, Richard was described as Britain's cruelest troll. And he was in several of the newspapers being unfavourably described, basically. On the 5th of November, the Times had a headline, Manchester bomb troll lies about MP murder. And in December of 2022, he receives notification from Hudgell's solicitors that legal proceedings will take place against him. Now, a bit of inside baseball, to use an InfoWars phrase, but at the time, he was told that if he simply apologised and took his film down, nothing would happen. But Richard took this to be, well, that's what it's about. They're trying to stifle my journalism. Why would they be trying to stifle my journalism? Well, I'm obviously right. And so from that point on, Richard doubled down and doubled down and doubled down. On the 22nd of February 2023, he releases another response to Disaster Troll and has Nick Kollerstrom come on to explain how in the recent invasion of Ukraine, Russia is actually the good guy. You know what? The more Nick Kollerstrom is a prat, isn't he? Like, I wish there was a more eloquent way of stating it, but Nick Kollerstrom is just a prat. Like,
it's like they say the NPC thing, like just a non-playable character, just soaking in all the bullshit, Putin-style propaganda from all these sort of places, and then just regurgitating it. Yeah. They're so predictable, these people. They wind up in a certain place and they say all the shit you expect them to. You could pull the cord at the back of them and you'll just hear the same shit come out. It's programmed. It's very sad.
On March the 2nd, 2023, Richard shows a film that proves that the Boston bombing was fake. And this is the Boston unbombing, the film that convinced him that the Manchester bombing was a hoax. On the 31st of March, Mariana Spring emails Richard and tells him that Hudgell's solicitors are going to be proceeding on behalf of Martin and essentially suing Richard. But Richard hadn't actually heard from Martin or from the Hudgell solicitors himself. And yeah. And then on the 8th of April, Mariana Spring publishes the article, Do Disaster Trolls Believe the Conspiracy Theories They Promote? And I get a mention. An insider who used to appear in Mr. Hall's videos, Neil Sanders, told me Mr. Hall admitted to him several years ago that he didn't believe theories about staged attacks, saying this is all nonsense. But he does think Mr. Hall has now convinced himself of these conspiracy theories. He's coming at it from the perspective that he's unearthed a massive fraud that has been perpetuated on the world, essentially. And so he's wanting to uncover that for the greater good, he told me. The intensity of that fan devotion is important here too. After the success of conspiracy theories like Mr. Hall and Alex Jones appears dependent on continuing to serve up new and ever more extreme material for their audiences. Neil thinks that that's been key to Hall's pivot to these kinds of theories. And I still agree with that. That was what the audience wanted, what the audience wanted. And we've just watched the evolution of Richard going from this is nonsense to, well, maybe it's not nonsense, but maybe you're not an idiot, to holy shit. Everything is fake. And once you've got to that point, where do you go, basically? On the 25th of April 2023, Richard has read in the newspaper that he's being sued, but he's still not actually heard anything. This is really, really strange because, or slightly sad, really, because he got his friend Andrew Johnson, who's got a friend who's a barrister, to check if any of these proceedings have been registered with any courts, and they haven't. And so Andrew Johnson puts out this video saying that this is all lies, that Richard isn't going to get sued, that nothing is going to happen to Richard, and that this obviously shows that the establishments are panicking. They just want to frighten Richard's fans. Anyway, on the 9th of May, Richard basically is presented with papers that are legal cases going against him. So it turns out they were wrong about that. I've received notification that a legal claim has been filed against me in the High Court. The claim is seeking damages and an injunction for harassment and breaches of the UK GDPR and Data Protection Act. Notice that there is no claim of libel or defamation, which has been incorrectly reported across most of the mainstream media. So good news about the lack of defamation or libel, but bad news about all the rest, I suppose. So, but at least he's taking the positive from it.